Hey, everybody. Welcome back to your Bridge Towards Wealth. I'm Chris Klepp, Wealth Manager at Strategic Financial Group, where we help business owners in and outside of their business expand to their vision. As we noted in the last guest episode, we're continuing to bring on guests who have a unique point of view on different topics that business owners face day in and day out. Today, we're welcoming Sheila Devi, an executive life coach for business owners and professionals in high-stress fields, and we're talking about setting boundaries, dealing with adversity, and living your best life. Sheila, really appreciate you taking some time. So before we get going, tell us a little bit about your background and how you became an executive life coach.
Well, first, thank you so much for having me, Chris. I'm excited to be here. In terms of becoming an executive coach, my work actually evolved. I am a certified professional coach, and I started out as a career coach. And in my work with career coaching clients, my clients got promoted into executive roles, into VP roles, into C-suite positions, and they kept me on as their coach. And so my work naturally evolved from career coaching, which gives me a really great perspective when I'm working with clients who are contemplating other roles and also how to navigate different changes within their careers. But my work naturally evolved from being a career coach into an executive coach. So now primarily, I would consider myself an executive life coach. And so what I do is I work with people in deadline-driven, high-stress careers, primarily law and accounting, as well as some clients in C-suite roles. And I help them to navigate both personal and professional challenges so that they have more time to do their best work, and also so that they have more solid the other things in their life are also solid. So their personal relationships, their health, etc., also are in alignment with what they're wanting in their lives.
Well, listen, I'm a big believer that even though I do financial advising, that time is actually our most valuable asset, not the money. And so I'm a big believer with that. And I guess if you help these people get to this level and have these problems, it only makes sense that you also upgraded your problem solving capabilities. What are some of the biggest challenges that you see high achievers running into now when they're trying to have it all, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do work primarily with high achievers, and I would consider myself one as well. I think there are a couple of things that I see that happen kind of across the board with high achievers. One of them is that oftentimes people think when they're younger that they will just put in X amount of time. So maybe 5 years, or I'm going to put 10 years, or I'm going to put 15 years into my career, and then everything will be set up so I can have it all. And really what often happens is that as that time is passing, other things are paying a cost. So I'm working a lot with my clients. They tend to be in their 40s and 50s. And at that point in their career, yes, they are at a point where they aspired to be. But the things that are not necessarily aligned are their things like their personal relationships and their health and what they are, how they're showing up in their communities, all of those kinds of things. And so I think that idea of in 5 years or in 10 years is a natural difficulty for high achievers. And then another one that I just probably can't go without saying is the idea of boundaries. I heard you mention that in the introduction. I think it is very difficult for people who consider themselves high achievers to think about what a boundary might be. Most people think that boundaries are actually the word no, and really boundaries might be considered the word yes. What are you saying yes to? So I teach a whole workshop called Healthy Boundaries in High Stress Fields to help high achievers see how actually setting lines about what they can say yes to is going to help benefit their entire career and their work for their clients.
Well, I mean, I think we see that a lot in. I know I see that a lot with my business owners, where life and business sort of bleed into each other, and they don't have those set boundaries so that allows them to get the most out of it, right?
All the more so now through the pandemic and the aftermath, in terms of the less clarity in terms of the lines of where things start and where they end.
Yeah, things have definitely gotten, I think, a little less clear in people's lives over the last couple of years. Sometimes it's been able to help them break through, but the world is a little messier around us in the last couple of years.
That it is.
So tell me a little bit, in your one-on-one or your group coaching, you get to hear what professionals are honestly struggling with, right? And so the common themes of the conversations, what are some of those common themes that you have with your clients?
Sure. Gosh, I think one of the things that I think a lot about these days is the idea of being fine. one of the things that I do get the privilege of hearing is how people are doing. And I think there's often a lot of pressure, especially at a certain point in one's career, when they're managing other people, when they are perhaps the head of an organization, to be fine. And that does make sense. There's a whole idea of this is, again, a boundaries thing. How much does one share? But I think that one of the common themes that I get privileged to hear is that people are not necessarily fine. That really there's a whole new consciousness about the importance of paying attention to mental health. That may not have been a word that people were thinking about 3 years, 5 years, 10 years ago. And so really starting to be aware of, oh, there is this thing called mental health, and I actually have to pay attention to it because maybe I've seen other colleagues who haven't paid attention to it, and I've seen things that have happened to them that I do not want to happen to me. And so I think one of the common themes is really people being aware of, I cannot do what I have done in the past. I know there is something that is happening to me that is not okay. And I have to figure out other ways to still do my best work, to still be proud of who I am in my career, but also to do it in a way that I am not going to hit something, some limit, some invisible line that I know it's dangerous to cross.
I got you. So if I'm hearing you correctly, right? So people are needing to understand that just because what has maybe been expected in the past is not what they should just be doing just because it's sort of some sort of program that's written into them. They need to take ownership of their own mental health and their own well-being and do what's best for them, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. I work with a lot of clients who kind of came up in careers where there were certain expectations. We know what those expectations were, but it's in some ways indoctrinated into them that this is what you do in order to be successful. And really, again, I think it's looking around at other colleagues and seeing kind of dangerous examples of things that are not sustainable and people hitting burnout, depression, all of these other things that make people go, oh, before I get to that, there are important things for me to start paying attention to now. So again, that idea of boundaries, or again, the idea of communication, the idea of being aware of what somebody wants to do versus what somebody doesn't want to do, and kind of beginning signs of resentment. It's really important to start to pay attention to early the kinds of feelings of what's starting to create resentment. What am I starting to wake up and not want to do? Pay attention to the signs early before they get to a point where you hit something that you can no longer keep going.
Well, I think that's fantastic because I know in my practice, we talk about the idea of enough a lot. And that people think always that running a business means you're trying to run it to make as much money as you possibly can. But money has never bought happiness. It only gets you more problems along the way. More money, more problems, right? And so there is some happy medium in which you can run, in my opinion, run a business, run a career, and that you have enough to get what you really want, as opposed to trying to get what's on the TV, what the Joneses have. You're not trying to keep up with the Joneses. If you don't need what the Joneses have, then you shouldn't strive necessarily for that. And it sounds like we're approaching this in a couple different ways, but to the same point is that don't do what you see the person next to you doing just because you think that that's what you're supposed to be doing.
Absolutely. You know that I love how you think about things and appreciate what you're bringing to your clients, and that we have a lot of overlap in these things. I think thinking about what's the cost is an important thing to consider. So often we do these things unconsciously, or because we think that there's these expectations of, or we have to do these things, but really what's the cost? And is that really a cost that you want to pay? And more so, I think the question is that there's something that's blindsided even about that. It is entirely possible. This is what I help my clients do, to have more professional success at less of a cost if one sees things and goes about things in certain ways. And that is what I love to help my clients do.
Well, everybody likes the idea of getting more for less cost, right?
It is 100% possible.
So obviously the last couple of years have been a huge roller coaster. The next couple of years will provide its own set of challenges, no doubt. What is, and so obviously I know this is probably beyond the scope of this conversation, but is there maybe like a chief tip, like a single tip that you have for dealing with adversity when you sort of get smacked in the face with whatever murder hornet pandemic, total change in the world that happens this calendar month.
Yeah, sure. The first thing that came to mind is a blog article that I wrote probably a few years ago at this point that actually got turned into a Tribune article. But the idea of it basically is about self-care versus the idea of self-compassion. Oftentimes people think that when tough times come that they need to take care of themselves. And absolutely, yes, make sure that you're eating foods that sustain you, and exercise is important. But I think one of the things that, again, high achievers often tend to do is to have an inner dialogue that has no grace for themselves. And so I'd say that the number one thing that can help people with adversity is paying attention to the conversation that they're having with themselves. If you're out for a run and all you're doing is telling yourself you can't believe you just did this thing or said this thing or whatever, that run is not actually going to be something that is going to, be in your health of your interests. It's this dialogue is what changes things. And so really paying attention, kind of a basic way of thinking about this is talking to yourself as you might want to talk to your friend. If you hear yourself talking to yourself in a way that is in any way something that you would never allow somebody to say to you, catching that and somehow transferring it to know that you are doing your best. This is a tough time in the world, and giving yourself a little bit more grace, and that is going to help you have more ability to face the adversities that we are all facing these days.
I really think that that's a great way of looking at it, right? If you wouldn't allow someone else to talk to you like that, why would you let yourself talk to you? Because your own voice inside your head can be much worse. You can be your worst critic and your own worst enemy, right?
Absolutely. And oftentimes people who reach the highest pinnacles of their career think that they have to have that conversation in order to be more successful. But really the evidence is the opposite, that if people have a little bit more grace for themselves, they're more likely to be able to continue to put themselves into challenging situations. So being able to find a way to have a little bit more grace for themselves, which some people might prefer that kind of terminology to the word self-compassion, but finding a little bit more grace for themselves, a little bit more cutting oneself slack, because nothing is always going to go perfectly. You are more likely to be able to continue showing up in those difficult situations and ultimately have more success.
Yeah, as someone who's often allowed perfect to be the enemy of good in my life, and certainly earlier on in my career, I absolutely understand that. So let me ask you, so is there some triggering point? I mean, like how and when should high achievers or business owners search for and interview and hire someone like yourself?
Yeah, so I would actually say there often is a trigger point, and the trigger point is when things are so bad, people have to figure out some solution. But really what I would encourage is for it not to have to get to that point, that really anybody in a position that is perhaps high stress, or where the impact of their decisions affects other people, where maybe every phone call you get is another challenging situation, anybody who is in that position would benefit from having a coach or someone on their team. And the reason why I say that, there's actually an analogy that I have on my website that I cannot remember where I first heard this, but it's the idea that we are all our own jars and we cannot read our own labels. So in order for us to get perspective, we have to have somebody, preferably somebody that we trust and have a more ongoing relationship with, who knows us, in order to reflect back to us what we literally cannot see, not because there's anything wrong with us, but because we are human beings. So I'm an executive life coach. I have all the tools. I also have my own team, because it's impossible for me to see clearly on my own as well. So anybody who's in a position of, again, either high stress or something that influences their work, influences other people, I would encourage them to think about coaching now, not wait till things get bad.
Yeah, I think the idea of being proactive as opposed to reactive, right? Don't wait until you're in the middle of the situation where you really need help, because at that point it's hard to build the trust with your coach that you need for them to really be able to listen and be able to enact the excellent advice that you're giving to your clients, right? And so if you can spend some time building that relationship beforehand, it's going to be that much more beneficial for
absolutely. And then you may never have to hit those points.
There you go. There you go. Right. Better, the ounce of prevention is better than the pound of cure. Right.
Amen.
So if a listener here wants to reach out to you after our conversation, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my email address is my name, as is my website. So my email address would be Sheila, SHEILA, at SheilaDevi.com. Devi spelled DEV as in Victor I. And my website is SheilaDevi.com. So either through my website or my email, feel free to link in with me and also just let me know that you heard this conversation so I know how we found each other.
Well, that's fantastic, Sheila. I wanted to thank you for your time today. We'll make sure to put a link to your website below this video on YouTube and in our social media. And if there's any way that Sheila can help, please be sure to reach out and connect with her. Thank you very much for your time today, Sheila.
Thank you, Chris. I had a great time.